What's up, guys? This is Quincy Carrier, and this is the show Q&A, where I take your questions from Twitter and YouTube and answer them here in the show in video format. And again, if you want to make sure that your question makes the show or have a chance to have your question make the show, be sure to be subscribed and notified so you can see when the post comes up on the community tab. Or if you want to do Twitter, follow me on Twitter, and you'll see when I post the prompt there. But without further ado, let's jump into the questions. The first question comes from Nick M., who says, if you were making a Browns all-time team, could Baker Mayfield be the third-string QB behind Otto Graham and Bernie Kosar? Nah. I don't think Baker Mayfield's there yet. I mean, Brian Sipe exists. He was a former MVP of the league in the 70s, led the Browns to great success, so it would be Otto Graham, Bernie Kosar, Brian Sipe, or you can rotate Kosar and Sipe in that order. I know Kosar means more to the fans, but Sipe is as good as a quarterback as Kosar was at that time, and Sipe does have that MVP hardware to show for it. But that's who I would put in the top three. I don't think Baker's in that conversation. He at least has to make the playoffs and win a couple of games before we can even think about putting him in that conversation. The next question comes from Giants Nation, who says, what's up, Quincy? I'm on the toilet at work, and this is the only time to ask you a question, but I'm not going to go into any further details. Thank you for that. Anyways, my question is, as a Browns fan, do you think Otto Graham and Paul Brown are underrated? On TV and YouTube, people talk about Belichick, Tom Landry, Bill Walsh, etc., best head coach, and Tom Brady, Montana, Peyton Manning, etc., best QB. Me, I think they are very underrated, but what's your opinion? Whoo, how much time do you got? But long story short, I agree with you wholeheartedly. Paul Brown has contributed more to the game than people realize. The face mask was a Paul Brown invention. The radio play call, that was a Paul Brown invention. The messenger guard, that was a Paul Brown invention. Training camp was a Paul Brown invention. The playbook was a Paul Brown invention. Just basically everything that we associate with modern football and how football has turned into as much of a mental exercise as it is a physical exercise all goes back directly to Paul Brown. Paul Brown is the guy who did that. Now, Otto Graham is a different legacy. He is associated with Paul Brown. He was the benefactor of a lot of Paul Brown's success. Some people don't give him the credit because, again, he played quarterback in an era where quarterbacks just weren't as glorified as they are today. Also, weren't asked to do as much. Also, Jim Brown, I believe, was there when Otto Graham was there. So I get why he doesn't get talked about as much. But the Browns and everything that Paul Brown brought to the NFL is amazingly underrated. I mean, Bill Belichick credits this guy as the father of modern football. This is the guy that the GOAT thinks is the GOAT. So, yes, Paul Brown is horribly underrated and underutilized, quite frankly. All these other coaches, and they have their legacies, and they have all these awards named after them, and that's fine. But all Paul Brown has his name on, as far as the NFL goes, is his last name is on the Browns. He has that, but it's not his team. He got forced out of the team, so it doesn't really feel like that. And Paul Brown Stadium down in Cincinnati, and that's why that team is so reluctant to sell the naming rights to that stadium, is because that's literally the only thing that Paul Brown has his name on in modern football ideology. And most people don't even understand what the Brown family is, why the Browns are named the Browns. It's after Paul Brown, the coach of the team, the guy who used to coach at Ohio State, the guy who was a military vet in World War II, the guy who did so much for the modern game of football as we consume it today. A channel like this would not exist if Paul Brown wouldn't have brought the mental exercise to football that exists today. So Paul Brown, father of a lot of things. Not a lot of people know about it. There's a Paul Brown documentary you can find by the NFL Network on YouTube. I highly recommend you check that out to understand the level of gratitude that the game should have for Paul Brown and the lack of recognition that he gets for it. There should be something significant with his name on it if that's what we're going to do to people who left a legacy onto this game. And it makes no sense that Paul Brown has done what he's done for this game and nobody puts his name anywhere. Eventually, I think there needs to be a concerted effort by the NFL to kind of put some respect on the name of Paul Brown. And I think, honestly, the Browns and the Bengals should finally stop bickering over the legacy of Paul Brown and both dedicate statues in each stadium to Paul Brown, because he means a lot to the game and people need to understand that. And it's just a shame how many people don't understand that the Cleveland Browns are named after Paul Brown and why that's such an important naming. But I digress. Great question, by the way, from Giants Nation. And the next question comes from Luke Cooling, who says, hi, as a Browns fan living in England, not many people know or are interested in American football. I only got into the sport after the 2018 NFL draft. I found myself supporting an underdog team of the Browns. Since then, I've been hooked, watching every game on the NFL Network. However, my question would be, if I were to introduce my friends to the sport, which Browns game this season would you want them to watch first and why? All the best from Kennyworth, England. I'm sorry if I mispronounced your last name and your hometown. I truly apologize. I'm not from England. I don't know what the city is called. I tried my best. But thank you, Luke, for asking this question all the way from the UK. Shout out. But the first game, I think, to watch this season, honestly, is going to be the first game on the schedule because the Browns open up against the Baltimore Ravens. And from all the chirping that we're hearing from Baltimore and all the chirping that we're hearing back from Cleveland, if that game happens on schedule, that is going to be a fun one. Even if there's no fans, there's going to be enough drama in between the pads, so to say, in order for that to be an exciting game to watch. That's going to be a physical game. It's going to be a tough game, and it should be a good game. In NFL, you don't know when's a good game going to happen or not. But yeah, Browns-Raven, that's the game to watch. If you're going to try to get your friends interested, if you can't make that game, then any Browns-Steelers game or any Browns-Ravens game, they play twice a year. That's also going to be a good one because those are rivalry games, and those tend to be good games. Next question comes from Casey Kinnaman, who says, hey, Quincy, let me ask you this. Who's your favorite all-time Browns player? Whew. This is kind of difficult, to be honest. I love Josh Cribbs, and I love Joe Hayden. I like Joe Thomas, but I never really connected to Joe Thomas like that. I wasn't really like a huge Joe Thomas fan. I always respected and appreciated him. But the two players who captured me as a child were Josh Cribbs and Joe Hayden. Probably Josh Cribbs is my favorite because I remember as a kid I would run up and down the street pretending I had a football in my hand, envisioning that I'm Josh Cribbs running a kickoff return for a touchdown. That was me in 2007 as a child. So that's probably my favorite all-time Browns player is Josh Cribbs. That's the guy who got me loving the Browns as much as I do, and also he was just such a fun person too at that time. Like, he was adding people on MySpace. He would message people back. He was a real accessible and really a guy who just appreciated the level of love that he had in this city, and a guy who was so fun to watch when he was able to get the ball in his hand. So yeah, Josh Cribbs is probably my favorite Brown. This next question comes from Just Chuck. Don't ask what, it's Just Chuck. And he says, what's up, Quincy? My question is, what QB/wide receiver combo do you think has the highest ceiling between all the AFC North teams? I would say the Bengals and the Browns are definitely the two teams that have the highest ceiling. The Bengals are deeper than the Browns in the wide receiving room. The Browns have more top-end talent. So I would take Jarvis and Odell's potential because those are two top 10, Odell's case, top 5 guys. And in the Bengals case, you have A.J. Green, who can be a top 10 guy, but he's starting to get to the end of his usefulness as far as his age goes. He's coming off of an injury. So he might not be that guy anymore. It's not sure. Tyler Boyd is coming into his own as one of those guys who's going to be on Jarvis's level, but I don't think he's there yet. T. Higgins definitely has the potential to be one of the better wide receivers in the league. And then you got a guy like Alden Tate who's going to get some good touches. And I think John Ross is going to have a decent year this year too. So I like what the Bengals have. I would take the Browns' upside because it's more dependable. You're not depending on a bunch of leaps happening. You're just depending on two guys who have proven that they can be either top 5 or top 10 to be top 5 or top 10. So I would take the Browns in that case. The next question comes from Corsucks Gaming, who says, hey, Quincy, if you could go back and redraft the Cleveland Browns 2017 picks, do you still draft Myles Garrett first overall, excluding Patrick Mahomes, of course? We can... Yes, probably, right? I would say yes. Deshaun Watson is tempting, but I don't know if he's going to be like the massive upgrade over Baker Mayfield that Patrick Mahomes obviously is. But I heard somebody mention this on Twitter, and I think it's apropos. I think Myles Garrett is going to be to Patrick Mahomes as Akeem Olajuwon was to Michael Jordan. Right? Like, Akeem Olajuwon went first before Michael Jordan, but he doesn't get ridiculed like the Sam Bowie pick. Ironically, the Sam Bowie pick in this context is Mitchell Trubisky, and that's going to probably turn out to be appropriate. But Akeem Olajuwon, although you can definitely argue he was not as great as Michael Jordan, was so good that it almost didn't matter within the city limits of Houston that they didn't draft Michael Jordan. I see the same thing being true with Myles Garrett. I don't think, just like there was no way you can argue against not drafting Akeem Olajuwon in 1984, there's a way you can argue against in that time not drafting Myles Garrett. That was a shoo-in. You had to take that guy. This was this prototypical pass rushing guy. Even if he busted out and never got any sacks, you would still be justified in taking him because of how much of a lock he looked like he was coming out of college. The fact that he has not been a bust by any means of that word makes that even easier argument to make. So yeah, I would still take Myles Garrett because that's who you had to take if you had the number 1 pick in that draft. And as much as every other team is going to talk about, well, they would have drafted their guy number 1 overall, 32 out of 32 teams, if they had the number 1 pick in 2017, would have drafted Myles Garrett. That includes the Chiefs, that includes the Houston Texans. Everybody would have taken Myles Garrett. So that had to be the pick. And I don't think the Browns should ever regret that. Again, I think that's the Akeem Olajuwon to Michael Jordan. Yeah, you didn't draft the greatest player of all time, but you drafted somebody who was one of the greats of all time. And that's what Myles Garrett has the possibility to become. The next question comes from John F., who says, who do you think are the most underrated and overrated players on the Browns from the Madden ratings? I have only really focused on the underrated players. I have not really looked, but I'll say probably, I think Kareem Hunt was like an 87. That's a little high. It's probably 2 points high. He's a good player. He's not at the level that he was in Kansas City, but he's a good player. Probably 85, so I would say he's a little bit overrated on that front. And underrated, man, where do I start? I made a whole video about the Jarvis Landry rating being flat out ridiculous. Nick Chubb is a little bit underrated. If you're going to give Christian McCaffrey a 99, I don't see how you can say that he is, 6 points higher than Nick Chubb? I think that's a little ridiculous. I made a video about that too. And also, I think Jack Conklin is criminally underrated on it. 78. It's one of the best right tackles in football last season. 78. That's terrible. I have a lot to say about the Madden ratings, but I'll try not to keep you guys here all day. But that's who I think are the most under and overrated guys, according to whoever makes these terrible Madden ratings. The next question comes from Wyatt Wickoff, who says, hey, Quincy, wanted to ask you, do you think the NFL will allow bigger rosters in case players get the virus during the season? If their plan is to go forward without a bubble, they better. Like, let's be honest about that. People are going to get this virus if they don't bubble up. It's just going to happen, right? And since it's so hard to maintain a bubble, one bubble like the NBA is doing, I would advocate team bubbles or regional bubbles. that are more easy to maintain and easy to keep a hold of with all the players that you're going to have. But if they don't want to go in that direction and not have any bubbles and just play this out regular with limited fan attendance, then you're going to have extended rosters, because you're going to get in a situation where people are going to get this. And the scary thing about it for a lot of teams, and why I'm surprised teams themselves don't want to bubble up, is unlike when you're playing football and you're running the regular risk of injury, there's a weighted risk of injury, right? Running backs are going to get injured more than quarterbacks. Offensive linemen don't really get injured as much as defensive linemen. You know, there is a tier list to who is most likely to get injured, and you can build your roster around it. With this whole virus thing going around, everybody is at the same risk to miss 2 weeks of action if they get it. And that means your quarterback is easily at risk. Your kicker, your punter, your center, your left tackle, all of these pieces, Myles Garrett, all of these pieces that you pay a ton of money for because you're kind of depending on them to be able to be healthy and be able to play a full season, are all of a sudden going to be at the same amount of risk of missing games as anybody else. And if that's going to be the case, one, you're going to want expanded rosters just so you can make sure you can play these games. And two, that's going to be kind of difficult to cover and watch week to week. I'm going to do it, obviously, but it's going to be frustrating. And I really think they should entertain the ideal of maybe teams hosting their own bubble or regional bubbles, because that's really going to take away from the game if quarterbacks are getting this virus in the middle of the season and missing 2 weeks because they have this. You know, it's already bad with concussions, and I'm glad that they do that and they make those precautions in order to make sure that there are less concussions. But it does suck when you miss a guy for 2 weeks because he has to be in concussion protocol. It's going to be the same thing, but worse because of virus protocol. And I would hope that the NFL has a better plan than what they currently are pretending that they're going to do. Because I just think if they go about this and they try to just work this like normal, it's going to stink. People are going to get this virus. They're going to have to pull quarterbacks. You're going to have to pull left tackles. It's going to be all over the place, and nobody is going to be happy about that. So again, NFL, please get it together. I want there to be a season, but if you don't get it together, we're going to have, at best, a very weird and abridged season with missing key players all over the place, or at worst, no season. So please, NFL, get it together. You had the longest amount of time, and honestly, I'm starting to get frustrated with this whole situation. Next question comes from Pangas7, who says, considering our biggest weapon is the offense, how many points do we need to put up a game to overcome bad defensive games? I think around 30 points in division, probably 28 out of division. I think that the Browns are going to have problems stopping the run and problems stopping the run specifically in the red zone. So I think teams are going to be able to put up points. So I think the Browns are going to have to put up about 30 points in order to win most of the time. Obviously, there'll be games where they don't have to put up 30 points, but I think 30 points is going to be the kind of standard. The next question comes from the Big Hurt, who says, how do you feel about the cancellation of the preseason and how this will affect rookies, especially Joe Burrow? I have no idea how the preseason is going to affect rookies, because unlike most things in the NFL, right, they took this away, and there are players who swear that the preseason is just useless, and there are players who swear by the preseason. So we're going to figure out, right, who is right on this. If more practice time is more important with your team, or if preseason games are more important. So we're going to figure this out. As far as rookies go, yeah, it's going to stink. They're not going to be able to get their first kind of game look, but that's more about the fans getting a look at these guys in a game situation. I imagine that for a rookie, the preseason doesn't adequately prepare you for what you're going to see when you walk into a regular season game. I don't think there's any way to really prepare for that. So for rookies, I think this isn't going to have much of an effect. We have to see what happens with expanded rosters to see if this affects bubble guys. The next question comes from Yazur, who says, thoughts on Washington football team? This is going to be kind of a hot take, but it's not a hot take. I see a lot of people clowning this, and I get why people are clowning it because it does seem incredibly lazy. But I actually think this is good in a way, right? Because if they had to rename this team and they did this in a rush, they would have just put out something awful. And if the goal is to get people to kind of forget about the last name that they had and kind of move on to a better legacy and a better name, then you need to have a better legacy and a better name and a better uniform and a better branding. My worry was with them kind of rebranding this so fast was that they would rush into this and have some kind of ugly logo that nobody would want to embrace and some ugly uniform and color scheme that nobody's going to want to touch. And I think getting it right is more important than getting it done quick. And for a year, we can just call them the Washington football team. It's not going to be a big deal. They're not going to be good, right? Like once the season starts, we're really not going to talk about Washington any more than we have talked about them already. So by the time the season starts, you're probably only going to talk about them when the Browns play them, and then you're going to forget, and then they're going to rename it. And in 20 years, you're going to buy a Washington football team shirt and be like, hey, remember when that happened? So, yeah, I think they did the right thing by taking this slow and getting rid of the name, but also putting time in to make sure that they can get this rebrand right, because you want the fans of the old name to be able to embrace this new identity that they're going to have to embrace, and you don't want that to be a rush process. So I actually think the genericness of the name is actually fine, right? It's easy. It's forgettable. They're going to have a forgettable season. Who cares, right? But that's it for all the questions this week. Thank you guys for asking them. Again, don't forget to hit the like button, hit that subscribe button, ding that notification bell so you can be notified. But again, guys, thank you guys for watching. Have a great day and have a good night.